Finally, part 5 of this grammar series. The reason it took me so long to come up with this video is that I think it's a very important topic. It's important to me, and I think it's very important to many of you Snap Language viewers, because you're either learning English as a second language or you're learning another language, and many of these issues in English also apply to learning any language. We've discussed a great deal of ideas in the series, but we've tackled them from the native speaker's perspective. You see, native speakers have an intuitive understanding of the grammar of their own language, so they can relate to these discussions in a very particular way. We haven't really discussed grammar from the perspective of non-native speakers, particularly from the perspective of people who are still learning English as a new language. As they learn the grammar of English from scratch, how do they deal with all these arguments over standard and non-standard grammar? Do teachers of English facilitate the process or create problems? It gets complicated, so stick around and let's discuss grammar and a language learner. I'll talk about my experience learning Dutch, and towards the end of the video I also have some tips to help English language learners deal with learning grammar in English. Hi, welcome to Snap Language. This is Mark Franco. When I was in college, I had the amazing opportunity to live with a family in East Flanders, Belgium, for a few months. That's a Dutch-speaking part of Belgium. They speak a variety of Dutch there called Flemish. I went to college there to learn Dutch as a second language. Much in the same way that many of you Snap Language viewers are learning or have learned English as a second or foreign language. The first thing I noticed in my Dutch course was that most of the emphasis was on learning Dutch vocabulary and grammar. Well, I didn't know any Dutch when I started, so I thought, cool, let's go for it. Now, here's the thing. I was living with a family there, so when I went back home after class, I could practice right away what I just learned in school. Hey, great. Well, it didn't always go that well. After a few weeks, I started noticing that a lot of times all the beautifully crafted dialogues in the textbook we used were not always very helpful in everyday life. The grammar I was learning was a model of proper Dutch grammar, and that didn't always reflect very well how people around me actually used the language. Why did we even use that textbook, right? It started getting really frustrating when I started understanding my teacher and even other people when they talked to me directly, but I couldn't understand them when they talked to each other. Well, you see, people used standard Dutch when they talked to me. They knew I was learning Dutch and they wanted me to learn good Dutch. But they used everyday conversational Dutch or Flemish when they talked to each other. Now, Flemish is basically Dutch, but for someone just starting to learn the language, I didn't know the differences. It could get pretty confusing sometimes. Now, here's the thing too. At the time, I was already teaching English as a second language, or ESL, or whatever you want to call it. So I already had some insight into this disconnect between the language in ESL textbooks and actual spoken English. Now that I was learning a new language myself, I was getting to experience firsthand what my students went through learning textbook English. You learn your lessons where everything is in complete sentences, where everything sounds great and follows standard formal grammar. Then you watch a movie or talk to native speakers in English and In the previous videos, I talked about prescriptive and descriptive grammar. Prescriptivists believe that grammar is about how people should use the language. Descriptivists are more interested in the grammar that people actually use day to day, whether or not it's the standard grammar. In comments to those videos, some of you who are learning English said that, well, they think it's important for them to learn proper grammar so they know what they need to know when they learn English. So let me clarify something first. Yes, of course, if you're learning a new language, you want to know how to put sentences together. You want to learn the grammar or the structure of the language, vocabulary, pronunciation, and so forth. You also want to start using and communicating in the language as quickly as possible. In Belgium, that's exactly how I was learning Dutch in college, though. I was learning all of that, but it didn't always work very well in real life. Here's the catch. If the grammar you're learning does not reflect very well how the language is used, at some point you'll need to start learning how the speakers of that language actually use the language, right? That's why it was a bit confusing for me to learn standard Dutch in school, but then experience something different in daily life. You know, in the end, I survived, and I still can't speak it that well anyhow, and that's okay. And it's totally my fault that I haven't kept up with it over the years. Another issue related to grammar has to do with the psychology of language learning. People need to feel confident in their language learning ability to use the new language to communicate. If you don't feel confident, you probably don't want to take any risks. Whenever you do take small risks, but then you make a mistake, well, if you're not confident, it feels like, a huge failure. Then you're less likely to take risks again. The process feeds off itself. The less confident you are, the more sensitive you are to making mistakes. So you end up avoiding using the language. The less you use the language, the less you practice, which means you're more likely to make mistakes when you do try. Well, how you feel about learning a language has an impact on what you put into it. How you experience the learning process itself affects your confidence. If you're afraid of making mistakes, and learning a new language means you will make a lot of mistakes, grammar starts feeling like the enemy. You may say, well then, just do your best to boost your confidence. Except that you have language teachers playing their part in this equation as well. And sadly, they don't always facilitate the process. Language teachers who are purists or gung-ho about prescriptive grammar generally try to pass the idea on to their students that you must get the grammar right to sound educated or to sound intelligent in your new language. Sounds familiar? This type of teachers ends up passing their own linguistic biases onto their students. They're well-intentioned. They want to motivate their students to learn the standard grammar well, but their approach has unintended consequences. This emphasis on correctness can make many students feel they'll never get it quite right. And if you believe them that you'll sound stupid if you speak a certain way, you'll be afraid of speaking. That's a common problem in the language teaching industry too. If you want to speak this language correctly and sound as good as a native speaker, you must use our method. Do you want to sound professional? Take my pronunciation course for $99.99 because if your pronunciation isn't perfect, you're a big loser. When you're learning a language, you can't really tell the difference between different registers. You rely on your teachers to teach you how the language works. Then your teacher tells you, never say it this way, you'll sound uneducated. Congratulations, you've just been taught how to be judgmental in your new language before you're even fluent in it. Well, that's not necessarily the learner's fault. You learn to trust your teacher's knowledge and expertise. You take their word for it. As a language learner, you don't feel equipped to discuss language bias in a language and culture you're still unfamiliar with. Hey, descriptivists set the record straight, right? Descriptivists understand that one variety of a language is just as acceptable as any other. We saw that in part 4 of the series. Well, in those online arguments between descriptivism and prescriptivism, I've noticed that language learners kind of get caught in the middle. They may hear the same discussions in their native languages, so they come with their own biases towards non-standard speakers. On top of that, they may hear messages from language teachers that there are good and bad ways of using the language. And then to them, descriptivists appear to be saying, no, you can say things any way you want, which is not exactly accurate, because even people who call themselves descriptivists are aware of and often use standard grammar themselves when it's appropriate. They're able to navigate the world using different registers. They can go from relaxed, informal English to academic, formal English when needed. Descriptivists also know that there is no language without some kind of structure, so even the so-called non-standard grammar is grammar. But descriptivists are not necessarily fighting the idea of grammar and saying it's anything goes. They're actually fighting prejudice or linguistic discrimination. Anyhow, right or wrong, that's how some people perceive the whole feud between prescriptivists and descriptivists. It's a choice between sounding stupid and grammar doesn't matter. That's not quite like that. But remember, these are online discussions. You can't take everything you see online to heart. At any rate, the focus of this video is on the language learner. The point is that English language learners find themselves stuck between conflicting messages. On the one hand, they hear this message.
This word ain't. I hate this word.
Oof. On the other hand, they hear this message.
A lot of people will judge you for saying ain't and in it as being an uneducated person, because there's so much like judgment that goes on about language in England. I'm just pointing it out to you. But, you know, sometimes we all probably say ain't. You can say it to add emphasis or in a joke way or whatever.
So which one is it? You must never say it, or it's okay to say it sometimes. No wonder it's confusing for someone learning the language. The messages are inconsistent, and some of the messages are pretty damaging. For language learners, their teachers have linguistic authority. Besides, even if language learners don't already have some kind of language biases themselves, they have to face one real thing. Whatever they learn in the classroom will be on the test. If there's a difference between standard grammar and actual use by the speakers of the language, ultimately, teachers will be the ones judging students' performance. Students don't have much of a choice there, do they? The correct grammar is whatever will be on the test. Good grammar is whatever the teacher tells you it is, even if it comes with a good dose of stereotyping and shaming. If you're an English language learner, what can you do about this grammar mess? Well, here's my 2 cents. First, acquire a good understanding of how the language works. As you do that, focus on the ideas that the grammar structures express. There's nothing wrong with learning descriptive grammar for that. That means learning vocabulary, learning phonological rules, learning syntactical rules according to standard grammar. Especially if you're a beginner, you need to acquire a solid basis before you can have a good feel for the differences in formal and informal grammar. But you should also understand that what you find in textbooks is based on just a model of the language. Always keep in mind that the speakers of the language don't necessarily follow those rules all the time. Languages come in different varieties, and sometimes these varieties have their own phonology, vocabulary, grammar, and so on. The good news is that as you become more familiar with the language, you start having a feel for how the language works. That's when you start learning the rules for breaking the rules and sounding more natural, depending on the situation you use the language in. Also, be aware that people have linguistic biases. For example, when someone says, British English is better than other varieties of English, they're operating on their own perceptions and stereotypes. Or maybe they have an agenda. They're selling you a product that they believe in. If they teach American English, they'll probably tell you you should learn American English. You might say, oh, but I want to go to school in the UK one day. Then definitely focus on learning British English if that's an option for you. But keep in mind that if you go to the UK, you'll find many language varieties there too, and some of them are very different from the standard British English you learn in textbooks. Oh, but my English teacher says that British English sounds educated. Oh, but my English teacher says American English is more hip. Well, I've got news for you. It sounds like your teacher's handing out stereotypes like candy. We should respect our teachers' knowledge and expertise, but sometimes they can be just as prejudiced as anybody else. Or they're just trying to sell you something. You know, this which English is better, American English or British English, is a long conversation, so I may make a video about that. Also, keep your own linguistic biases in check. Wherever you're from, there's a good chance you have a prestige language variety and negative biases toward other non-prestige language varieties. Sadly, people are very comfortable with and often unaware of their own stereotyped perceptions. They think if someone sounds uneducated, unintelligent, or whatever, their perception is enough evidence of truth. Remember, that's just your perception. You learn to attach negative or positive traits to that perception. Your perception is not an objective assessment of the speaker. This mindset doesn't change when you're learning a new language. If you already have linguistic biases, you'll bring them with you as you learn a new language. Just be aware of your biases and don't let them get in the way of your language learning goals. I've been an ESL teacher for a long time, and I see that in action now and again. For example, let's say I'm working on my students' pronunciation. Every now and again, I have a student who's reluctant to practice what I'm teaching. Then they say, but in my country, we learn British English. I don't want to sound like that, like all American and stuff. Well, two issues with that statement. One, if you want to sound British, then you need to work on your British pronunciation so people can understand you better. I teach American English, so I can't help you with that. Second, if you're living in the United States, you'll need to find resources so you can continue your studies of British English, if that's what you want. Americans won't be able to help you with that very well. Just keep in mind that you may be isolating yourself from all the language learning opportunities that living in an English-speaking country affords you. If you're doing that because you bought into this idea that one English is better than another, just remember that these are stereotypes. Take some time to reflect on how language biases may be affecting your educational decisions. Just think about it. Your stereotypes may be having real-life consequences for you that may be holding you back. Like, if you're living in Australia, learn Australian English, for crying out loud. You get the idea. Well, I thought this was going to be a long video, and I was right. This topic really gets me going, so like, share, subscribe. Thanks for watching. Relax. Enjoy your language learning journey. Ik wil je bedanken voor het kijken en ik hoop jou bij de volgende video terug te zien. Boom! I still got it, baby. Sort of. Bye.